What's up, everyone? Tara Roberts here with 444, and it is time to beat the waiver wire. It is one thing to add players that you need for this week, but playoffs are right around the corner. Wins are critical, and your fab is probably low. So it is time to start planning ahead and strategically stash players before week 13 even hits. Before we get started, remember to like this video and subscribe. And if you want more fantasy insights and tips, head over to 444.com/plans and sign up for a subscription today. And exclusively for our YouTube audience, use promo code YouTube at checkout to save 25%. Now let's go ahead and dive right in with our first player, Samaje Perine. I'm not exactly certain if Samaje Perine just stepped his game up and earned more touches, or if Jaleel McLaughlin just fell out of favor with Sean Payton, but either way, Samaje Perine is back on the table. Perine had 7 receptions for 60 yards in week 11 and 7 carries for 55 yards and 1 touchdown, plus 1 reception for 11 yards in week 12. That is 13 fantasy point performances 2 weeks in a row in 2 difficult matchups. And that's the big encouraging part here. He hasn't been putting up increased production in layup matches. He's been doing so against tough defensive matchups. So we don't have to worry about analyzing the schedule ahead of time because we know that the Broncos are committed to the run being very involved and the running backs being very involved, and the matchup doesn't really deter their plan. At the very least, you are snagging a strong handcuff ahead of time. Moving on to our next player, Ty Chandler. Yes, I am advocating for a player coming off of a paltry performance. Ty Chandler had just 4 carries for 8 yards and 1 reception for 3 yards. It was a major letdown coming off of 2 strong games with a minimum of 10 carries and a minimum of 10 fantasy points in each game. Here's the approach that you are taking with Ty Chandler. There's a very good chance that the fantasy manager that rosters Chandler in your league is maybe a little bit frustrated and feeling like he was just a flash in the pan and wants to drop him, especially considering that this is such a huge bye week. So check waivers, see if he's available, and add him on the cheap. One bad game shouldn't have us bailing out on him. I need a multi-week sample before I can definitively say there's no value. And this is the point where contenders should be retooling dead weight and then adding high upside handcuffs. Ty Chandler is factually a high upside handcuff here, and that's not changing with Cam Akers out for the season. And in week 14, the Vikings play Vegas, a very good matchup for running backs. He is worth a stash. Moving on to the next player, Rashid Shaheed. I do a ton of waiver wire content, and one of my top 10 ads of the week is A.T. Perry. But this is beat the waiver wire. We are getting creative here while everyone is grabbing A.T. Perry because Chris Olave is in concussion protocol and Rashid Shaheed is dealing with a thigh injury. We are grabbing Rashid Shaheed. We may not get to use Shaheed this week because his thigh injury could keep him out, but the injury isn't expected to be long-term, and Shaheed should operate as the wide receiver 2 behind Chris Olave rest of season with Michael Thomas on AR. Shaheed is a boom-bust player that thrives off of 1 or 2 big plays a game to bring himself to fantasy relevance. He's got just 55 targets on the season, averaging just 5 targets per game. But the tide might be turning here for Shaheed with Thomas out. In week 10, when Thomas suffered his injury very early in the game, Shaheed had 9 targets. The Saints had a bye week, and then in week 12, Shaheed had 5 targets before going down fairly early with an injury. Those 5 targets were on just a 26% snap count. The game was setting up to be another high target game for him. Shaheed has strong value rest of season, and you can add him now while no one is fighting him for you. This next player, Curtis Samuel, fantasy managers in your league are potentially looking at his week 12 performance and saying there is no way that he repeats, but don't be shocked if he does. And for that reason, we are adding him ahead of time, and we are getting Curtis Samuel right now. We are not waiting for confirmation that he's back to an increased workload. Samuel had 3 straight games of 18, and 14 fantasy points weeks 4 through 6. He then had 1 underwhelming performance of 4 receptions on 8 targets, and then he got injured. He missed week 9, then he came back, and he just wasn't really himself, but week 12 was huge for Samuel, and I think it could repeat again this week. The approach that we are taking here is kind of weird because we are adding him to use him this week, and then we are stashing him through the week 14 bye. But I truly think that it'll be worth it here. After the bye week, Washington faces the LA Rams, the New York Jets, and then San Francisco. You're probably looking at me and wondering why I like that schedule. Well, I like that schedule because it favors the guy that the defense is least likely to put tough coverage on. So while Sauce Gardner is focused on shutting down Terry McLaurin, Washington will target Curtis Samuel because that is exactly what they did against Dallas's tough defense. We are in this for the long haul with Curtis Samuel here. Grab him, use him this week against Miami for the exact same concept. Jalen Ramsey is not going to be covering him. Stash him through the bye week and roll him out as a low-end flex option rest of season. And we're going to close things out with one deep league stash, Jake Browning. There's not a ton to analyze here because we've only seen just one full game from him, but I don't mind what I saw. Pittsburgh can be a tough matchup, and while there were definitely some shaky passes that Jamar Chase just kind of made happen, the overall performance was kind of encouraging. Browning was 19 of 26 for 227 yards and 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Not a bad week. This week he faces Jacksonville, and the Jags have been vulnerable against the pass. If Browning has another decent outing, he could be a potential streaming option in Week 14 against the Colts defense that has been very pass-friendly. But if you are grabbing him now and stashing him, you don't have to dump Fab because you're already ahead of the game. And that wraps things up. As a reminder, there's still value in adding guys from last week's list like Josh Palmer, Demario Douglas, and Noah Brown, so go back and look at last week's video for even more waiver wire adds of great value. Thank you for watching this video. Be sure to like the video and comment below. And if you want more fantasy insights and tips, head over to 4for4.com/plans and sign up for a subscription today. And exclusively for our YouTube audience, use promo code YouTube at checkout to save 25%.